There we are. We're live. There. You good to start? Put us up
Yep.
on. Okay. Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host Mango,
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
and today we're going to talk a little bit about
Yeah.
Spellbreak. I almost said Fortnite. Before we do that, Buddy, why don't you the folks that know what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we like to talk about games, and in our latest foray into the world of BRs, we're talking about Spellbreak, which is a really interesting. I feel like this is a diamond in the rough. I have not seen people talk about this at all. Basically, like I know people who have, or I've seen people, on Twitter or whatever, who are who started working on the game. A bunch of people from Riot left to go work on Spellbreak, but then it just like completely fell off my radar until you were like, "Yeah, I'm playing Spellbreak," and so then we played a bunch of Spellbreak, and I was just like, "Holy fuck, I can't believe this Spellbreak!
Yeah,
Nuts!"
and to be fair, so I had played it back in pre-alpha, and it was very rough around the edges then. Um, it was still recognizable as to what it is now, but it was like there I think there was a couple of key, like it was just kind of like the shooting things. There's none of the skill stuff and the sorceries. There's none of the kind of like the advanced skill stuff. Um, I put it down, and then friend of the cast Monik was like, "Ah, let's check out the Spellbreak thing." I'm like, "Ah, I'm already in on this. Let's do it." So yeah.
Yeah, one of the funny things is, I think Spellbreak completely fits like a profile that I'm really interested in, because I do think I generally like BR sort of mechanics, but I probably, like something I've expressed frustration about in the past is kind of like the super like long range kind of like nature of it. So it's kind of surprising that I just like, I don't know, this like never crossed my path in the previous like 4 years. I mean, the other funny thing is that like, wow, whatever. So I guess we're talking about Spellbreak.
Yeah. What was that thought you just
The
got?
other funny thing is that I actually technically I do like know some people who like work on that game. It's just completely not something that I've
Oh
that
yeah.
I've gotten into or talked to them about or anything along those lines.
Fair enough. Yeah, no. So it's made by Proletariat Games, which is out of Boston, which is near where I am. So that's always interesting. Um, Not that I'm gonna go knock on their office door or anything, but you don't see a lot of games these days. At least ones with a lot of attention. I guess it's not out of anywhere that isn't somewhere in California, right? Or maybe
Mm.
Montreal, right? Like Ubisoft's in Montreal, but like there's not a the games tend to be pretty geographically. But anyway, just to kind of set the ground. It's a. I mean, I feel like it's kind of like so. It Sorry. Let's start from the top. It feels it's a BR. It's a wizard based battle royale. It also has a Dominion mode. It feels kind of like Fortnite in both the engine and the visual style, and also in that their secondary mode Dominion feels like it might have been the thing they were building in the first place, and they like jumped on the
Absolutely.
BR train. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I also think that it's very, it's like flighty in a way that certain BRs aren't. Warzone and PUBG are very heavy BRs in a way that Fortnite is, you got a big jump, for instance, right? Apex also kind of gets into this
yeah.
territory, I think, where it's you know, uh less about restriction on your character, and there's actually quite a lot of movement involved.
Yeah. And there's also like it also feels like very physics based in a way that like Apex does too, right? Like because
Sure.
like there's probably decent physics models in, let's say, Warzone, at least maybe PUBG, but like you never really get to interact with that because like your hop is like a human hop, whereas like this game has levitation and some forms of flight, and Apex has like its various kind of like, well, that like lets physics kind of like impinge on how you're doing or on what you're doing, but let's go over the core basics. There are 6 types of gauntlets, um, and they all have a primary shooting ability, which just kind of acts like your primary shot. And they also all have like a spell that goes along with them. And then you also can get, during the course of play, a glove on your offhand. They all have rarities. Your offhand glove doesn't have as many features as your primary hand glove.
You
Um,
know what the rarities increase, by the way? Like
uh,
cooldown time on the sorcery, damage, like
Both of those is my
okay.
understanding. Yeah. Um, And what else? Your shots don't have ammo, but they do draw from your mana pool, and your mana pool fires both types of your shots and your levitation power, which is super interesting, especially early. So you have three pieces of equipment. You've got a piece of armor. Like in every BR, you have a piece of armor that you can throw on. You have an amulet that increases your mana, and boots that make you move faster. And especially early, especially when you haven't gotten a good amulet yet, the mana restriction really kind of affects how you play, right? Like, a missed shot is like a big deal if you miss a shot. I feel
Yep.
like, um,
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I also think that it's neat because it ties some of these mobility concerns into damage. Like that because it's all drawing from the same mana pool, you kind of have to make the choice. Do I want to hover? Do I want to use levitate? Or do I want to fire? Right? Because I kind of
right.
can't do both simultaneously, which I just think is like a fascinating and really cool design
You
choice.
know what? And this also affects the third thing that I forgot is that there are rarities on these things called runes, which are basically kind of like utility spells, which charge up at intervals and have some different mechanics with them. But like it affects that too, right? There is a flight rune which lets you fly for a while, makes you fly fast. It's hard to bank, so it's not exactly the most combat friendly thing.
Mm,
But like that's a choice you can make. It's better for like traversing the map versus something like Featherfall or Spring Step, which are like the Featherfall's a long hop with a slow fall, which and it's fascinating. Like all of these runes have different uses, and they all feel like they have their spot, right? Like for a while, and when I started playing, I thought that teleportation was just kind of obviously the best rune. They did nerf it a little bit. They made the actual teleportation um a little bit slower to go off, but like they all offer various forms of mobility, or with the one exception of your favorite, like the Wolf's Call or something, or it's
yeah, the wolf's blood. Holy shit, was that so good? Yeah, so just to explain what this rune does, you use it and it highlights in red all enemies nearby. By the way, this does include like the NPC enemies, of which there are in the Dominion mode there are a lot. In the BR mode they only spawn in certain like locations and under certain circumstances. Um, but being able it's wall hacks basically, right? Like being able to track the movement of players as they're trying to like juke you behind walls and stuff like that is so huge and so useful. Though I think the real thing that actually um made Wolfblood so good is that I had two charges of it because I was playing Conduit at the time, which lets you generate an extra charge by using the sorcery, which basically meant that I could have 100% uptime on it. And I think that like that's also like a really neat kind of consideration, right? That like with certain classes and specs, you have different kinds of considerations.
Yeah, I mean, this is I think part of what makes it great too. Is there's like a lot of like interchangeable parts that you can switch to
Yeah.
like do builds, which we were talking about this last week with Outriders, how like things feel very constrained in some ways. Like and on top of all of this, you get three passive skills that you can swap, and you have to unlock them by leveling up the gauntlets. But one of them is gives you an extra charge in your rune. Um, there's actually a pretty decent system there, right? You have three passives, and you have 7 total points to play with to build it. But you can also give up one of them to save the point, um, which is super neat. Um, it's got a lot of oomph to it. Um, what else? And the other thing too, just to go back to the Wolf's Blood thing real quick. I think a big part of it too was that we were right before we switched over to Dominion, since Dominion's 5 people and BR's max 3 people per team. Um, we won a game, which is great. It was friend of the cast, Monica and us two. And I think part of the thing that Wolfsblood really worked well for there is it let us get the drop on enemies, right? Like people that weren't aware
Mm.
of us, we could just go attack, which is super important in a lot of BRs and very important in this one. So one of the things, and this will wind into to why I like this game, is and a lot of time in the shooter BRs, especially in something like Warzone, it comes down to who shoots first, right? Like
Mm.
especially in Warzone, less so I think in PUBG and Apex. 'Cause
Time to
Apex,
kill is so short, right?
yeah,
Like it's very lethal gunplay. So obviously, if somebody has a second on somebody else, that's it. That's
yeah,
GG, right?
yeah, and the weapons are hit scan,
Yeah.
almost like nothing except for maybe conduit is hit scan, and it's still like you know relatively high skill aiming, right? Like you don't have like the kind of like aim down sights and like drill shots into people thing that you do in
There's also no headshots or anything along those kinds of lines, which I think people would probably take some issue with if you're a player who is like, like Monik, our friend, is very good at these sorts of shooter games and he's hitting headshots all the time. But I think it makes the game much better
yeah.
because it makes mid-range altercations more kind of like accessible and predictable damage wise, right? You never really have to contend with a big spike of damage. You generally understand based on the ability type that they're using, right? Like how much damage is incoming at any individual moment, right? Like the conduit is rapid fire, very fast shots that don't do a ton of damage. Same thing sort of with the wind shots, whereas the earth ground pound that does a lot of damage, but you have a big ability to dodge it, etc., right? I think that kind of predictability is very good overall, and helps the game quite a lot compared to something like you know PUBG or Warzone, where being able to get those headshots to really like wipe somebody out right off the bat is I think it's satisfying on one end, but it's frustrating on the other,
Yeah,
right?
because it doesn't feel like you've got a lot of counterplay, which like the
Yeah.
engagements in this game are drawn out enough that you feel like you've got a real ability to kind of recover from being ambushed. Although it obviously does give you a big disadvantage. Just on that headshot thing, the only thing like it also doesn't like just fit the model of the game. Like maybe for the ice gauntlet, it would make sense because that kind of gives you a zoom and it's kind of like the sniper glove.
Yeah.
But that's basically like, and I feel like you'd put that on as like a skill on
Like,
like
what does a headshot look like with, the the shockwave ability?
yeah
You can't do that, right? Because it just
yeah
that's not how the ability works. Same thing with like a fireball, right? Like,
yeah. Especially because the fireball is like built around being like slightly on the primary gauntlet, you get like a slightly bigger AOE on it too. So um yeah. That all being like, I think it's super compelling. I think the individual abilities for all the primary gauntlets are really well done, right? Um, I think that a couple of the gloves just don't feel as good on the offhand, right? Like in particular, I would say that the wind gauntlet doesn't feel great on the offhand just because like there's nothing like super special about it's like it doesn't feel like the tornadoes bring a lot of utility without the kind of cool stuff you get from it. Um, from
oh,
like
interesting. I kind of feel the opposite way in a way. I thought I had a couple of games where I had the wind gauntlet on my offhand and I never used the main attack and I only used it for the tornado because I think the tornado was the tornado is
okay,
really good. Partially because I was using the conduit.
oh,
So for a lot of my games, I was main hand conduit, offhand whatever, right? And I think my favorite offhand might have been the wind gauntlet, just because pairing the tornado with the lightning strike is really strong. Because the lightning strike takes a while to hit, but if I can hit somebody with a tornado, I
I
kind
see
of
what you're saying.
guarantee
Yeah,
they're in that location, and then I hit them with the lightning strike, and they're shocked for 2 seconds or whatever, right? Like that was kind of my I don't know, thought process. I kind of had the feeling that the offhand gauntlets were balanced a little bit around like the useful main hand, the useful auto attack is like counterbalanced by a less useful sorcery. For instance, I think the ice sorcery is pretty not great, but the attack is very good. Does that make sense?
yeah. So
Compared to the wind gauntlet.
I was actually gonna say that like the sorry the the ice offhand is my second least favorite offhand just because I guess the snipe is like the sniping is a very kind of niche thing to do in this game, right? Like you're generally not like pausing to line up shots in this game, which is what the ice hand's all about. And
Mm,
the kind of signature thing about the ice um about the ice gauntlet is when you shoot it on your primary hand, at least behind an ice trail that you can skate on. And
yeah.
that doesn't happen. And that is very much at odds with its sorcery, which is a around you local AOE freeze, right? So like if you're gonna use this,
Yeah, point blank AoE.
yeah, I mean I guess it like makes it I get like versatile maybe, right? Because you can like if somebody's close you do that, and if they're far you use the snipe, but like um yeah, I just don't like it as much, except in that except unless I'm using the skill that gives me the level 1 ability on my offhand, which is ambidextrous.
Yeah, I don't love the. I think the Ice Gauntlet might be one of the most disparate between
Yeah.
the two, right? Because you have a sorcery that's very, close range, and a main that's very long range. And I don't think any of the other ones I would feel like, the firewall with the
Everything's like
earth.
very mid-range otherwise, right?
Yeah, everything's very mid-range and it also like complementary, right?
Like,
Like it feels like the toxic clouds complement the toxic main hand. It feels like the lightning main hand complements the lightning sorcery, right? Um, which I guess I don't feel that way about Frost. Though I do think that I like I did like using the Frost in my offhand, specifically because like if I wasn't conduit on my main hand, having a long range attack I thought was very good. Like there was one on both of the games that I played as toxicologist main hand and Earth main hand. I took Frost on my offhand because I felt like I didn't have any long range capability and I wanted to be able to like I don't know fight people further out than whatever else.
see, with I like pairing, uh, I like pairing if I'm going stamina his Tox on the offhand just to be like the ultimate kind of close range bruiser, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, I do think that that's a valid choice. In a certain sense, it's kind of like, do you want to be an all-around build, right, that has options for both long range and close range engagements, or do you want to specialize, right, where it's like, I'm going to kick the fuck out of you if I can get close.
yeah.
That's yeah, that's fair, right?
I think part of it too is that like the offhand is very like the offhand ice is very long range, but like aiming shots in this game is I feel a little fiddly just because like you've got travel time of the projectiles never been, and the game's so mobile, right? Like it's I think a little harder to pull it off effectively, right? Like the conduit also has very long range on it, right? Like and it's
Yeah.
a flat
Yeah, I don't think
shot,
I
so
ever picked up the Frost Gauntlet with my conduit when I was conduit main.
yeah. But I think like that's a almost a better like it's a more practical long range option, um, for like for like casual use if that makes sense. Right? Like if,
I guess I agree with that, yeah. Especially because like your offhand is probably going to be something that you are not super invested in the same way.
right.
Where and the conduit offhand, I don't think the conduit offhand does any damage. I also think this is my problem with the main attack on the wind. It just feels like you're plinking for like 4
Yeah.
damage a hit, and it's just like that does nothing. And when you have conduit on your main hand, every consecutive cast does more damage than the previous one. So you do get to a point where it's like if you're going blast 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 blast, it's getting more powerful over time. But that doesn't happen obviously if you have conduit on your offhand. Whereas the ice gauntlet does
Feels
like
like it hits for a
that's a
chunk. Yeah.
significant amount of damage. But I think I do generally agree with you. I had honestly most the big thing that was really determining what I did on my offhand was the sorcery. Thinking about it, right? Like I liked taking the wind sorcery. I like taking boulder fist, or not boulder fist, whatever it's called, boulder
Stone
throw,
shaper.
smash. So yeah, the stone shaper one, right? Like
Yeah.
I think mostly what I was thinking about is I was thinking about okay, what sorcery do I want to pair with my main hand, right? For instance, when I was toxicologist, I wanted fire because I want to. I don't know how to play toxicologist without fire in the other hand, right? Or even fire without toxicologist in the other hand. It just feels so good to put the toxic cloud down and then immediately blow it up in a huge gigantic nuke.
Yeah. So this is actually an interesting thing is that there are combos in the game,
Yeah.
and I feel like none of them work as crisply or feel as good as fire and toxic, which is clearly like the one they came up with and then built everything else, or at least that's what it feels like to me, right? Like
I like lightning with other things. I like lightning with the boulder one because the boulder one obviously
right,
like stuns the person for a second.
but that's not so like those are good like combos, but they're not like true. It's not like they have like this special interaction.
Oh,
Right?
sure. I do think the lightning and tornado do have a special interaction, but
They
that is
do.
not the reason I'm doing it. The reason I'm doing it is to put somebody is to lock somebody in place and then call the lightning down on top of them. I'm not trying to create the lightning
Yeah.
tornado.
So my kind of experience with the tornadoes is that like put like throwing something into the tornado like you can do it with toxic or with fire or with lightning is it doesn't do a ton of damage, which is
Hmm.
fine, but it's mostly just kind of like to like put a little bit of oomph on it, which doesn't like the thing that feels most satisfying about the wind tornado is if you can do a triple combo is you can put like fire or toxic on the tornado, and if you then use the other of the fire or the toxic, it'll blow the tornado up, and that does a shit ton of damage. like an absolute monstrous amount of damage. So that's cool, but like, um,
Yeah, I also just feel like there are not a lot of CC options in the game, right?
yeah,
Even like shocked, right? Like shocked, you can still move, you just can't act,
yeah.
right? I don't actually. Does the boulder stun you? I got the sense that it did because it seems like when I hit people with the boulder, they stood still for a second. But
Uh,
I don't actually. I can't confirm that.
I don't
I don't know that
think
I
it
ever got
does.
hit by a boulder. Okay.
Um, yeah. The only thing that really stops you is frozen, and frozen requires you to be standing in the thing
Oh
for a
yeah,
while.
yeah, yeah. That's
Um,
true. I think that was good. I did get frozen once. One of the interesting interactions is that Dominion is point based, right? Which makes this stuff much easier to deal with because you have a very clear place to throw your spells, right? If you are assaulting a point and you want to get defenders off the point, you dump your toxic on the point so that they have to run out of it, right? Or you run in and you drop your ice cloud, or you bring down your lightning on the point, right? The BR mode doesn't have those sorts of options, right? The combat is much more like fluid,
yeah.
which made me feel like certain abilities were better in BR for that reason, right? So, for instance, I thought the boulder was better in BR, and I thought the firewall was better in BR, and I thought the tornado was better in BR, just because like those have they are less about like aiming onto a specific location to get a hit. If I do the lightning and I whiff, that really sucks. But I feel like the other ones, it is less of an issue. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, I think I generally agree with you. I think that Wind's just a little bit underpowered in the Dominion mode in the first place, just because like I feel like you're trying to dump out so much damage, right? Like the utility isn't as useful because there's not as much room to maneuver around in, and like
Yep.
or and there is in some ways, but like you're also like trying to stay on the points as opposed to VR where you're just trying to kind of fight. Um, Actually, I kind of want to say that I don't think I really like the more I played or after we played that session of Dominion, I don't think I like the Dominion mode so much. Like
Really
I
interesting.
part of it is just like I just don't think it's like super well balanced, right? Like I could feel it like slowly creeping towards that kind of like that kind of like toxicity I felt with WoW, right? Like
Yeah, like the metagame problem. I
yeah,
get that for sure. I
yeah,
absolutely felt that. We did one match where we faced up against an entire team that took the rebirth talent, and I wanted to pull my hair out because I felt like there's just actually, and I think I would have gone to bat and I would have said don't want the rebirth talent. I want I want the whatever it is. But just fighting a group of people who were clearly mildly coordinated, right? That you had to kill twice in order to like gain any ground was just like incredibly aggravating.
yeah. No, I think that's like, and I think that those things like started shining through the more we played of it. Is like the meta, because it's not super balanced around Dominion. The meta is a little bit more rigid around it, and that kind of takes away a lot of the joy. I can feel myself getting into the kind of like places I used to where like I'd be kind of getting mad about like starting to get mad about things about like playing me is like I don't know if I want this, right? Like I don't know if
Yeah,
this is worth it.
sure. Like the competitive, I always talk about this with like League and with StarCraft, right? Where when you win, it doesn't feel satisfying. It feels like you just like kicked the shit out of a bunch of, toddlers. But when you lose, it's like you were matched against the best players in the world and there was nothing you could fucking do and it just fucking sucks and I'm just mad at all my teammates because they're not good and they should have gone to Moon when I told them to go to Sun, you know what I mean? Whatever, right? Like,
Yeah, no, and I actually think that this kind of like we've talked about like why the BRs were such a breath of fresh air when we started playing them
yeah.
out of this. I think this is like got the real kind of like idea here is when you start to lose in a BR, you're out, right? Like you're done,
Mm,
and there's not like in some like we held our own pretty well in Dominion, but like if this is almost like kind of like a Arathi Basin too, like in WoW, right? Because this is essentially the same mode. You commented on this. It's like
yeah.
you get so far ahead that it's kind of like why even bother, right? Like at least in WoW, like you can farm honor or something, which has some like extrinsic reward thing, but like and it's just kind of like. Well, I guess we're going to throw ourselves at the enemy team for another 20 minutes while we wait for their score to tick up, right?
Yeah, I
Like,
also just think that there's a visceral fun in the BR mode to certain systems that wasn't there in Dominion, like in the acquiring stuff. I mean, like in Arathi Basin, for instance, there's a fun to Arathi Basin that is just I run in and I blade storm on this guy's face and he fucking dies, right? And there's a fun to the BR mode that is finding cool loot, level, picking up special items that I'm like, oh, this is like neat. And those are like instances of fun that are outside of the competition, right? Like they're a part of the competition, but the thing that's fun about bladestorming on someone's face until they die is bladestorming on someone's face until they die. I can be winning or losing and do that, right? And the fun of picking up that loot in the BR mode is not necessarily that's completely unrelated to am I winning or losing? Am I gonna finish first or third? Right? Like it is just I open the chest and a big green thing pops out that I want, right? Um, and I didn't feel that Dominion had that. Dominion only had the joy of winning and losing. Maybe a little bit of pulling off, like something that really kept me in league in this way was doing technically complex things that just make you feel like you owned the shit out of somebody, right? 1v1ing somebody in lane and killing them. That's a satisfying thing outside of the context of are we winning or losing the game as a whole, right? But I didn't get that feeling as much in Dominion. There were a couple of times where I was like, oh, I'm sneaking up on this guy. I drop Toxic, immediately ignite the Toxic, and I blow their whole team to hell. That feels okay, but that was a very rare occurrence compared to
Yeah.
just the ambient fun that I find in other places in these kind of competitive match modes.
So in the BR part, I felt I think I can put a little bit of a finger on this, right? Like
Mm,
in like the fights in BR mode feel like kind of like almost like mini fighting game matches contained within like the larger BR, right? Like it feels like there's a lot of back and forth. It feels like when you're one-on-oneing something, you're really kind of you know beating them directly, right? And like yeah, sometimes you get third party, or you third party somebody else, but that's a kind of like a strategic thing that's a little bit different. In Dominion, it feels like you're pinned if you're trying to capture the circle, you're pinned to it, so you feel like restricted in that way, and coming in because like every second we don't have points is the second that we're ticking down, um, and on top of that, like given enough distance, everybody kind of resets in the BR mode, right? Like you go find yourself heal potions or armor potions, right? And you get yourself healed up. It's very easy to not be at full strength in the Dominion mode. And on top of that, it's also very easy to like not have the same upgrade pass or opportunity. Like something I didn't really like about the Dominion is that like instead of having your three pieces of equipment, you got the opportunity to kind of like upgrade them, with like individual pieces. And like I didn't have a good sense of like how those individually worked. And I like I don't know. I didn't like the kind of like piecemeal upgrade. Because it feels like the right thing there to do is to figure out what the optimal path is for like when you pick a speed upgrade, when you pick an armor upgrade, when you pick a man upgrade, and just follow that kind of route. Which, again, this kind of like meta lock thing that we were talking about earlier that just didn't feel great.
yeah, I mean, on one hand, I do think there is there's something enjoying it like that I can enjoy about that in the sense of creating these builds, right? Like something I realized pretty quickly is that only one speed upgrade is good in Dominion. I thought I once took 2 speed upgrades, and I was just sitting there and I was realizing I was like, I don't spend enough time running around on the ground for this to matter. I think one of them is useful because like just a little bit of extra speed will help you dodge things or whatever, but most of my time is going to be spent floating in midair, and what I want for that is armor and mana. And there's something that I find satisfying about coming to that conclusion, right? Where you are deciphering kind of the arcane interactions of the game systems, right? Like this is the same sort of thing that makes it fun to like, I say with my Mythic Plus team, we have like a joke, like nothing matters, because no matter what legendary I'm running, no matter what build I'm running, I basically do about the same amount of damage, right? The game is remarkably well balanced in practical terms, and really you can do whatever you want. But there is something fun about saying, oh, I'm going to pick up this legendary, and then I'm going to reevaluate my talents and my conduits and my whatever else to try and make this legendary as good as it can. That's a fun thing, and I do think that that is a fun thing to do in Spellbreak. But I just kind of felt like Dominion was too, first of all, too random, and second of all, too quick for me to like make those kinds of real considerations. Like something that works in the BR mode is getting a chest and like, a fire gauntlet pops out and you have a wind gauntlet and you want the wind gauntlet, but the fire gauntlet is one rarity higher. Like
Yeah.
you get a moment to sort of make those kinds of decisions. I just felt like the in Dominion I did not have that moment. And the choices were so constrained that I rarely felt like I had a real sort of choice about what I wanted to do at any individual, break point. So
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's about right. Right, there's just like not the same type of ability uh to kind of like you can't just search for stuff in Dominion, right? Like you have to be like taking points or killing enemies or maybe killing the little guys. I don't know. I feel like the PvE enemies are like not great in either mode, and I can see them improving that. But I just think that like you don't really have the time to engage with them in Dominion mode, which is I think where they make the most sense. Right, you can like pull a little bit more loot off of them. They're kind of like jungle mobs in League. Um,
mm,
in the BR mode, they're just kind of like annoying, right? Like, um, and so it's not
I
a
actually like them quite a bit in Dominion mode. I think that they're very well designed in Dominion mode. And I spent a lot of my time. One of the things I was doing was if I got behind, I would spend some time killing the little guys. Specifically because you can level up the gauntlets such that you basically one shot them. Um, and
Sure.
you just kill the little guys. You get a couple scrolls. You kind of like look around for some items. And I think that that is a neat way to kind of like catch up in the Dominion mode. In the BR mode, I really honestly don't see their purpose.
Yeah,
At
so
least at least not in the way they're currently implemented.
yeah, so the part of the problem is they don't consistently come out. The best thing there for is like for farming the small kind of heals and
Yeah.
shards, which you can find
Yeah,
other
like I
places
kind
too.
of wish that they were more. I almost sort of want a BR that has a little bit of this PvE element in it, right? Where it's like maybe after the first circle, maybe not at the very start of the game, but like minions will spawn in locations according to the loot in that location, right? So if you want to go into the castle, it's not just sitting there. You're gonna have to, you're gonna have to kill some stuff. You're gonna take some chip damage, right?
You're right.
I think that would actually be pretty good, pretty okay design. I don't know. I'm not a game designer, obviously, on these titles, so I can't actually make that determination. But I really just did not love the way that they came out in that.
Whatever.
For the listeners at home, Mango's green screen just fell over, so that's fun. Anyway, so yeah, I did not love their implementation in the BR Mana Vault thing either. Maybe if it was 100% of the time, I would like it more. So it's like something that I know I'm gonna have to deal with, and I want to like kind of prepare myself for. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that like yeah, I think part of it's like the inconsistency, like you're pointing out here. But yeah, I just don't think they have like they're not like worth killing except for like in the like they're kind of actually kind of dangerous in the early game, right? Like if someone pops a vault and they show up and then there's another team nearby, it's actually kind of you might be screwed by like the by that interaction. But the fact that it's random also feels like it would be frustrating if that managed to kill me like an early game once, right? Like
Sure. Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
I think I think if they actually just made them show up every time, it'd be a lot better in that case, right? Because like then you have
Yeah.
like someone's landing near us. If we pop it, we're putting ourselves at risk by exposing ourselves to the little guys, right? Like,
Or
um,
I think the underappreciated version of this is chip damage, which is just like small instances of damage that you kind of take. One of the things I noticed about Spellbreak is that chip damage is much worse in this game than it is in other games, right? If you come out of an altercation, even if you come out of on top, it is much harder to get back to full health
yeah,
and armor compared to some of the other games. You have these limited inventory slots. You're not necessarily going to be able to carry all the health pots. It takes a while. It's going to take you 10-20 seconds to sit there and consume all the armor shards, all the health pots, which I do think is actually really interesting and compelling. Um,
yeah,
because there's a certain, like one of the things that WoW designers talk about is the presence of a healer means that between every encounter, the party is topped off, right? So like there aren't a ton of scenarios where they can challenge long-term kind of like damage over time outside of sort of like a raid environment, right? And I think that kind of applies here, if that makes sense. Where part of what makes it interesting is you come out of a fight with somebody and you are at 15 health, and it is a real. It's not guaranteed that you're gonna top yourself back off. You might have to go into your next fight with 75 health and no armor, or 75 health and half armor, just because you expended those resources in the first fight, which I think is neat and interesting.
Yeah, no, and you're definitely scrounging around for healing after every fight. Um,
Yeah.
and I think the other part of this is interesting too is like I've at least found that I'm picking up, like I'm picking up a variety of different, like sometimes I'm picking up a bunch of the small heals because they pop so much faster, right? Like
Mhm.
you can swallow them down in 2
And you can
seconds.
use them in combat. That's a
Yeah.
huge thing. That was different. I don't think I've ever popped a healing ability in any BR in combat. But I was really frequently doing it in Spellbreak because first of all, it's not punishing. The time tends to be lower, right? Like it scales, right? So obviously, if you take a big healing potion, that takes 6 seconds, I think. Um, but like the little shards, those are just like 2 seconds each. And second of all, you can move, which is so huge. Being able to drink and move so that you can like LOS the person and kind of tuck behind a wall, and you know that they're going to keep trying to like get in range of you or whatever, but you can kind of like dodge out of the way as you're waiting for your cooldowns and stuff like that. I think it's perfect. I loved that aspect.
Yeah, and I encourage you to maybe be holding some of those smaller shards, right? Like you
Yep.
don't need to have you're not always just carrying the biggest thing. Um,
How did you feel about the big potions? I know that there were legendary. Uh,
oh,
there were legend
there's
the
legendary and there's
safeguard
epic.
and the knowledge potions. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
those. There's two types of safeguards, which are just basically heal both armor and health. Um, I found those to be good for like inter fight, like your between fights. Like I would never like those don't pop well, especially because like weirdly because of the, it takes off health shields and then it takes off health. Right, I always found like or I often found that there wasn't necessarily a good opportunity for me to use one that would get full usage out of all of it, especially for the legendary ones. Like at the end of a drawn out fight, they were useful, but like mid combat, right, you're probably low on shields and pretty high on health, so you don't want to pop like something like that. The knowledge
Yep, sure.
potions I always found were kind of like I almost always would use them immediately when I got them because like it's
I don't understand their purpose. I have to say, like,
well they give you more charges on their sorceries and your runes.
no, that's my point, right? Like, I guess you are just supposed to pop them immediately. I don't know who would hold on to that. That does
Yeah.
not seem smart to me in
So
any situation.
theoretically, I think it's useful to like if if you see a fight coming and you want to pop it, but it's also not worth the slot. I think this is also the big problem with one of the talents, which is like you can hold extra runes or gauntlets in your inventory. It's like it's not worth the slot, right? Like,
Yep.
um, and like I played a couple rounds with the gauntlet one just because I was like, oh, I like having like a powerful offhand, um, when I'm playing win. So maybe I'll try like switching around. It's like put the sorcery on cooldown when you swap them. And so like if you use a sorcery and then immediately swap gauntlets, like maybe it makes sense, but like I just didn't think it was ever worth the slot that you took up that that you weren't holding another healing item in it. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
but yeah, um, but like you were saying, I do think like the timing dynamic is super important and super integral to like making this compelling, right? Like if you're dueling someone, it's really hard to get a heal off, especially if it's a bigger one. But if you're in like either a squad fight or a multi team fight, like being able to hide like um the games I've played with Monarch, the number of times where like a third team comes in and like my kind of like downed corpse is able to slink away and then we can go hide behind a wall and I can get rezzed and we can like fight again. We're great. That's actually
That's true. That is also something I have never done in any other BR ever. Like,
so this is actually an interesting thing is the way you go like there are a couple things here. In like most of the other BRs, you have a down but not out state that can be rezzed. But interesting, I think this is super key actually, is when you're down, you can't be shot to death. Like somebody has to walk up to you and effectively do an execute move on you, which I think is super key to like making it hard, like to kind of the mechanics of the game. It's actually fairly easy to also bring people back. Like if you go down, then your team member can enter the next circle and spend 10 seconds like just like dancing in anywhere, and it'll bring you back, which I think is interesting set of mechanics. Like it really emphasizes like you need to take down the whole
They're
squad.
really good. I think going down and then getting shot out is one of the worst parts of PUBG or like any of those BRs where you can go down and then you're in that kind of crawl state, and it's like I wonder what percent, maybe 50% of the time, 60% of the time, they just follow up and shoot the shit out of you until you are dead, right? And like so, sometimes in the midst of like a big firefight, you can get out of it, but I do think it sort of forces you to do a real full team wipe in order to like definitively win a combat, right? Because like I tried doing this. I thought it might be smart to exile people in combat. It was not. It literally got me killed, right? Like it does not feel like you can take a second to exile someone's teammate um in the middle of the combat. So if you are fighting somebody, you have to kill all of them or none of the or they will like pick themselves back up, which I think is actually really good. I think that that's good and a fun interaction and a great way to kind of like structure the game, because you don't sit in these situations where it's like the one person who's good sits up front and is doing all the stuff and is like, winning everything, and you're just dead and like riding in their ear for 20 minutes, right? Um, I don't know. I just think that interaction is really sweet. Um,
Yeah, no, and on top of that, I actually think it's like you can use it strategically too. Like there were many times when I would go to exile someone to try and draw their partner out so that we could
yeah,
so we could fight them, right? Because it's obviously a very good. I actually think that they could do a little bit more, like when you're being exiled, just like pop up an alert, it's like your teammates being exiled or something like that. Like obviously it worked well for us, at least because like we were on voice comms. But if I wasn't on voice comms, I feel like you wouldn't necessarily know that your teammates being exiled. But I think that'll come with time, right? It's still kind of like it's not. I think it's technically out of early access, but it's still kind of like a title in development is the way I feel about it.
yep,
Um,
sure.
but I like you said, I think it's super good. Like it makes the kind of it kind of like work out a lot better. It's just, like part of it too is that like you can't like because it's not like a shooter. The cover is a little bit less dark, right? Like Warzone, PUBG, even Apex, right? You're in and out of buildings, so like if you had to like approach someone to 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 down them in those games, I think it'd be a little too easy to like just get in cover and go res someone. You can't traverse the distance fast enough, and the person's it's too easy to get like to become very well covered in those games. Whereas
Yeah, I think that's definitely a consideration, because the engagements in those games are much longer, right? Um,
and,
there's so much less very long range sniping going on. The only thing you can really do it with is the conduit gauntlet, and even then, like that thing just plinks, does
yeah,
tiny amounts of damage. I was trying to figure out if there was damage fall off or not, and I have no idea. I still
I
was
think
not
there
able
are
to.
for some of the gauntlets. Like
Okay.
I think like I think well part of it is that like the toxic gauntlet like spreads. So like if you get and it disappears relatively quickly. If you get far off, like the damage falls, then you're not getting as hit by as many droplets. But but yeah, and to that point too, like I think Apex actually solves this problem as best as it can in the kind of in the shooter space and giving you those down shields that you can point in the direction of the person shooting at you. Like I think that's probably the right balance for a shooter style game. Um, otherwise, I don't like it's just you're too hampered when you're down to like really get into like it's an interesting problem. And I think that you have to go the Apex route or this route, and I don't think that
Yeah.
this route's really reasonable for a lot of shooters because
Yeah, maybe that's definitely fair. How did you feel about the circles and the leveling up nature? How did is that something that I don't know? What are your thoughts on that mechanic? We haven't talked about it yet.
yeah. So just for the folks at home, so if you don't know or just to lay it out, is as the circle closes and you pass to the next circle, you get abilities that level up. I think it's an interesting way to make the fights dynamic. I'm not so sure I'm enamored with this particular mechanic, right? Like whether or not you've managed to cross the boundary seems kind of arbitrary. Like it's never made a difference to me, but I would hate it if like I lost a fight because somebody happened to be inside the circle. I couldn't cross the border to pick up the next ability.
I feel like it is mostly an excuse to space the leveling out, because
Yeah,
in Dominion mode it's just a function of time,
right.
right? And the circle is also a function of time, so hey, let's just make it so you cross the circle, you do the thing. And I feel like it was sort of made for those reasons, but I do think that there are some interesting kind of gameplay uh
Implications.
implications. Yeah. For instance, I was definitely more keen on moving to the circle in this than I am in most other games, right? Like in PUBG, you kind of learn not to go into the circle in a way. Like you want to hang on the edge of the circle for as long as possible. Or at least that was what we were doing when we were playing,
Mm.
3 years ago. Um, but this really made me want to beeline. Like I kept wanting to beeline straight into the circle as soon as the next circle spawned because I wanted to like level up and get my next thing. Part of it is I wonder if if I played more and I would think about the different abilities in a more complex way, I would maybe have, like in one direction or another, I would have sort of preferences, right? Um, I don't think I played enough to have a good sense of what are my power spikes, right? Whereas in something like League, right, like I intensely understand the power spikes of my individual champions, right? Like maybe I spike at 6, maybe I spike at 9, maybe I spike at 13 or whatever, right? In this, I don't know. I don't have a good sense for where most of my power is coming, or like what is the thing I'm most looking forward to being able to do. I mostly just want to do more things. So every circle felt good, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And I like I said, I think it gives good variety to the match itself. Like intra match stuff is like um the individual fights play out a little bit differently per circle just because the abilities are changing up in a very highly visible way. Um, I think it's very clever design. I just like I think like the part about going through the circle to do is just like you said, just kind of a way to kind of force it and space it out. I also think it makes some of the there's an ability that gives you a little bit of speed. This is in the second column, and every time you read a body scroll, you level up, which lets you level up early, right? And there's a couple of abilities that are like very clearly have strong early game, um, strong early game power. Um, but I also find that kind of thing's like a little too random to even be like super worthwhile. Like I think there are some clear winners and losers in the secondary ability space. Um, that around like kind of like these different level up mechanics, which feel like I don't want to say they're half baked, but I feel like they're all like 3/4 baked, right? Like there's
Mm-mm.
like it's not perfect. It's pretty good, but it's not perfect, and it's fine because like there's enough kind of mixing and matching you can do to make it all kind of worth it, but like and to make everything feel like approximately okay. But I don't think it's anywhere near being um near being like perfectly beautiful or whatever, right? Like I would fully expect that if this thing blew up and we got like a riot equivalent team like iterating on the balance for these like like Fortnite gets or even Apex gets, um these wrinkles would be smoothed over. But I think that's like as long as you don't pick the traps, you're pretty good for now, which is I think good enough for what this game is.
What are some of the traps, do you think?
So I think that like I said, I think that the one that levels you up as you get body scrolls is a trap because you can't reliably get body scrolls, right? Like, and also
Okay.
like as you get towards the end game, it's not as useful. Um,
Are there different kinds of scrolls that are better than others?
so there's just three types, right? There's one for each set of passives, right? There's like mental scrolls, spirit scrolls, and body scrolls. And they just level up
Okay.
one of so those three passives you have three levels or have four levels to them. They've got their base level and then the three upgrades. So you need to get three of each to get to full capacity on all of them, right? Um, like
I
you
felt like I got a lot of mind scrolls, but not a lot of body scrolls. But is that just random?
that's
I
random.
felt like that
Yeah,
was, yeah, okay. All right, cool. I thought for a second that maybe it was like it gives you a certain number or a certain kind of scroll by default or whatever, which would be a little bit You know, like that would obviously be a little bit strange, but I figured that was just random. Um, when it comes to the gauntlets, do you like what? First of all, do you know if they have added gauntlets or if they have just had these ones?
So I don't remember. Um, if I don't remember if, like when I was playing back in the pre-alpha if there were any more, but I don't think they've added any in a while if they have. But there's obviously I think room to expand on them, right? Or like room to like do things like swap out sorceries or something, or swap out the like the way the individual projectiles work. And I think that could be interesting.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely get that. I also do wonder what I think, like what I would want to see expanded on, right? Like if I were to add a new class to the game, what is the game missing right now that I would like to see, another thing? Like what is a new element that they could add that would be really interesting?
Yeah. Uh, yeah. So I don't know if I can think like part of it is that I don't think that they're like the ability space is like fully fleshed out. Like I don't. What would be a common thing, right? Like we've got like the kind of like four classical elements plus wind plus. I mean, I guess Earth usually gets broken out into acid and earth, which we've got both of already. So maybe like
You could maybe do a water, like a true water, not ice,
yeah, through water
where
not
like you
ice.
could hose. I don't know what that would look like.
Yeah, I mean the part like a blast that like knocks people back, right? Like that has like a knockback,
Mhm.
but I don't know how useful that would be. Um,
I actually wonder if that would be an interesting thing, because one of the things we talked about was the ability to create shock, like you could shock someone by shooting water that they're in
right.
with lightning. But that's not something that exists in the current iteration of the game, right? Like it's not like I can douse you with a hose and then shock you with my conduit. But I feel like that would actually be pretty interesting if
Yeah,
you could set something kind of like that up.
you can kind of do that with the ice paths from the frost, but like that's like so niche that it's like super hard to
Yeah.
pull off. Yeah, but yeah,
Maybe that kind of on-demand shock though would be bad for the game. I don't know.
yeah. You probably want to like have it leave a puddle on the ground and be able to shock the puddle on the ground, just like make it a little bit more controllable than the ice thing, which
Yeah.
is
I
like
do
very
sort of
narrow.
like the idea of like different sort of soak conditions, right? Like imagine a thing where there's a water gauntlet and you can fire a glob of water at somebody, splash, they are now soaked, which means they don't take fire damage or something like that, right? Like I think you could get into a couple of those sorts of conditional areas, which would be really neat, but also might ruin things, right? Like imagine a world where if I get lit on fire and I have a water gauntlet, all I do is shoot the ground to soak myself, and immediately I'm not on fire anymore. Like that's dumb.
So I think that so like the fire doesn't last so long that I think that actually be a problem, but I think that's actually good counterplay, right? Like the wind gauntlet can like knock down firewalls. There's like you can also do that like with
It
some of the
can?
yeah. Um,
Wow, I actually did not know that.
this is like I think so. My take is that the wind gauntlet's supposed to be like the high skill, like not obviously good gauntlet,
Sure.
which has like because it has a little like little counterplay mechanics. This has also got like the knockback stuff, but
The big thing I think about the wind gauntlet is you aim it at the ground and you can pop yourself up,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
that. I think that's very technical play, right? Obviously, but
that's
I didn't
the
know that you
obvious one,
could.
yeah. And
Yeah,
actually,
I
that
didn't know that you could.
now that I think about that, that makes it much better on the offhand too, because it's like kind of like a defensive offhand. Huh, interesting. Because you get like
If you have the rank one of it, yeah, I guess that would
you
make
don't even
sense.
need the rank one of it. I think it's just a property of the wind projectile. Like its elemental interactions, it knocks down firewalls, or it knocks down like it. Yeah, I think it
That's interesting. I
extinguishes fire.
had
I
the
think you
wind
could also
gauntlet for a long time, but I just never even tested if I could use it to bounce myself on the offhand.
well, you
It didn't
can't
even
use it to
occur to
bounce
me.
yourself, but you can use it to you can now use it to knock down firewalls and disperse toxic
Whoa,
clouds.
whoa, 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 whoa. Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha. Yeah,
yeah.
that's interesting. That is interesting. I feel like that is kind of fair counterplay in a way.
Yeah. But that's like kind of like the base elemental thing, right? Like which the water would be, which is like knock someone off a fire, or like put puddles on the ground. I also think you could probably do something with like with like the traditional like zodiac elements, which is like it would be like metal and wood would be the missing ones. Um,
Mm.
you do like a true wall rather than a firewall, right? Like something that actually blocks I like to see some
Like Maze Ice Wall in Overwatch or something like that.
yeah. I'd like to see like a couple more defensive powers, right? Like ones that are like a little bit. I wonder if that's antithetical to kind of like the hyper nature of the game, but I think it'd be neat. Um,
No, I get that for sure. I think if I was designing the game, I might want to add that as a sorcery. I kind of wish one of the sorceries was like you imagine a sorcery that creates a project, like creates a wall in front of you that you can just hold for a couple seconds. Not like a maybe sort of like a Reinhardt wall, right? But like, for 3 seconds you can't shoot or anything, but you hold a thing that will take any incoming damage, and then it goes on cooldown for 20 seconds or something kind of along those lines.
yeah,
I think that would be a really sweet sorcery to add to the game, and it would be something that I would be like really, because one of the things I like about the offhand interactions is like I said, I like shoring up, I guess, some of my weaknesses or whatever, and I could definitely foresee a world where I feel like I'm weak to long range interactions, and I take that ability so that I can, prevent myself from getting sniped down or something kind of along those lines.
yeah. No, I think it'd be neat if you had like for like something like say like metal, where like you would hold it up for like a short period of time, but it reflects things, and like maybe it only reflects the first ability, so you could counterplay it by like poking it with like a conduit spike and like reflect
Sure,
that, which is
like the Genji, ching 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 thing in
yeah,
Overwatch.
that or like the Yasuo wall, right?
Yeah,
Uh, uh,
yeah, the Yasuo wall would be sweet in this game because there are so many projectiles, and just being able to just negate.
yeah. Although,
I guess most of the sorceries aren't really projectiles. Really, just the boulder is. But
yeah, you can bend the boulder with the tornado, which is neat. It's better defensively, but like something I want to.
oh my god, I've never seen that, but it makes total sense, and that's fucking nuts.
Yeah, no, and it's like my Spellbreak bucket list is like use a tornado to bend a boulder into someone and like get the hit with that. But it's obviously
Yeah,
tough.
I felt the boulder was a zoning tool. I don't think I ever really hit with it, but I used it quite a lot to I don't know. I guess I would say put people into tough positions. There was one time where I was playing the Stone Shaper, and I had a fire in my offhand, and I would wall, and then I would boulder to try and like they either get hit by the boulder or they run into the wall, right? Like
Yeah,
those are their options, sort of thing.
I think it's good for like coming up on unsuspecting people and also like
Yep.
driving somebody off of something, right? Like you said. I also think it becomes much better once you get accretion on your main hand, which like makes it gains size as it goes.
Yeah, I think I only played one game of Stone Shaper in BR. So I don't know that I really saw accretion.
Yeah,
Uh, that we tended to do really good in the BR mode, to be honest with you. I was really surprised. We got top 3, top 5. We won a game. Yeah, there was one game where we came in. You guys were number 1, and then I came in and I was like, okay, well, get prepared to fucking lose. And then we also got number. This is the Wolf's Blood game actually.
yeah.
That we also got number 1 in because
We were just like wrecking people like
yeah.
around a Castle Bogbar, I guess it was. That's another thing to talk about. Like I think this map is like super interesting and varied. And it's like I've had a good time. Like like depending on where the ending circle ends, you know, changes up like how things are gonna feel like a lot. Which I think is very good. Which it doesn't always end up like
Yeah,
in these PRs.
I liked. I think I own the only map I've ever played in any BR that I've really liked was the very first PUBG map, whatever that one was called, um, and this map. All of the Apex maps I thought were like unmemorable, and I never, like in the first PUBG map, I had a very good sense of what the different locations were like, going to them, and the kinds of interactions that I was going to have there. What does it mean to land in these houses versus to land at the school versus to land at wherever else, right? Like, and I just never got that sense in any other. Maybe I just didn't play them enough because I only, I played more PUBG probably than I played of any of the other ones. But I like this map a lot, and I immediately understood, right? Like depending on what location we're at, like what are the kinds of like the fort was very vertical, for instance, or you might have that like there's the one which is a long castle with lots of chests, but it's kind of in a valley, sort of like on either side. I just thought all of that was really well designed.
Yeah, and to your point, like I think part of the thing with the other like for all being like Unity store assets that the first PUBG felt like, right? Like the areas still managed to feel distinct, whereas something like Warzone, it feels like a lot of the areas aren't like the buildings are the same, as but like they're arranged in kind of like very similar ways, and so it doesn't like the areas don't feel super distinct. Um, I think Apex, I think I disagree with you, and the areas don't feel distinct. I just feel like the maps don't feel as big as they appear to, if that makes sense. Like I feel like PUBG, I think part of it's the speed as well as the like the speed of like the kind of like you run at and that like, you go at that kind of like makes vehicles like I feel like PUBG the map feels the biggest, even though it's probably not square mileage wise. I think like Apex and Warzone move too fast for it to feel right.
True. I also think that PUBG is smarter about its kind of copy paste assets
Yeah,
than PUBG was, or I'm sorry, than Warzone was. In Warzone, a lot of the buildings that I'm farming are very similar, but in PUBG, those buildings are not. It's not like that, right? Like if I'm landing in a location, I'm typically landing on a unique location with like a unique set of buildings and a unique layout, right? Like either at the docks or in the military base or at the school or whatever else, right? The hospital. Those buildings are all unique, but they are surrounded and they're kind of and the traverses between these are dotted with a lot of copy paste buildings. So I never really minded, like when I'm moving from hospital to school because the circle is on school or whatever. I never really minded like popping into these houses and just kind of or like going up the little wizard towers we called them, right? Those were all copy paste assets. But because they weren't like the big focal points in the same way, Warzone it felt like the big focal points were these like gigantic brutalist apartment buildings that all had the exact same layout and we were always landing on one and we were always farming it and always had the same layout and I that just felt shitty to me.
yeah,
There are unique spots in that map to be clear, right? But I don't know, there's just something about those specific apartment complexes that we just every map started with farming one of those. It felt like that I
yeah.
think was not great.
Or like move to them very quickly. I think part of that too is that like they also like are meta arranged very similarly, right? Like something say what you will about PUBG, but like each area of the map, even if they were a bunch of copy paste buildings, they were at least arranged because they were probably arranged manually and kind of haphazardly. They were
Yeah.
like they had a unique arrangement, right? And like sometimes they would do weird things like turn them in weird ways and back them up against weird geometries so they felt different. Whereas like in Warzone, every freestanding apartment building felt like every other freestanding apartment building. Um, because of like the clean on it. And I think this game puts a lot of variety out there, and the map still feels kind of small, but I think that's fine because the games I think it just feels a little bit faster, right?
They
Like,
are much faster. I mean,
yeah,
it took us a PUBG match. I feel like it's like 30 to 40 minutes. This is like 20 minutes tops. Like if you end the game in top two, yeah, that's a 20-minute game, right? Like, which is good to be honest. I think that the gameplay would wear out much faster if it was slower, um,
I think I agree. Yeah,
because the progression is I actually think the progression is about the same, but it is more aggressive. So there is the same difference. In other words, there's the same difference between being a well-geared character in PUBG and a not well-geared character in PUBG, right? As there is a well-geared character and a not well-geared character in Spellbreak, but in Spellbreak you gear up much faster, which feels good, right? Like it kind of felt like like every chest you pop has something good in it. Whereas PUBG, you might go 10 or 15 minutes before you find a good gun.
yeah,
Like that's not one of like the starter shit guns. Um, and I don't know. I don't know. That's just like an aspect to the game, I guess.
yeah. And because you're also always starting with a thing that's like you know at least semi valuable to you. Like you always have like a gauntlet. Um, and that's all going to naturally level up over the course of the game. Um, I think that, and I also think that like, uh, I want to put this, that like, I think you're like you're mostly right about this, about the looting aspect. I mean,
Mm.
I can't remember my deeper my apologies. Yeah. But yeah,
Anyway, Spellbreak is a good game. We're
yeah,
at our hour mark, I guess.
yeah, it's a lot of fun. I do like it's 3 person squads, which is a little bit inconvenient, but otherwise, maybe that's like a minor thing. But like it's super fun. I don't know how long I'll keep playing it, but it's fun for now. So good.
Yeah.
Um,
Tell me
you know
about your
what?
week. How's it?
That's before I remember what I was gonna say. So
Oh, okay.
part of the reason why the looting also feels better is not only you find a lot of stuff like you said, but it doesn't feel as gear dependent. Like the game has a lot of skill to it because like of the longer
Sure.
TTKs, right? Like a better player could defeat a worse player with a better gauntlet. In fact, I think it's more important that you be good than it is to have good equipment, which I think
Yeah,
is very
I think that's
important.
true, specifically about the runes. I was very surprised at how well I thought the runes differentiated good play from bad play. Like I specifically remember there was one person who was really just fucking destroying me because he was using. He must have had like the extra rune thing, but he was using either spring step or feather fall to just like constantly bop into the air, and he just ran circles around me and killed the fuck out of me. And I was like, you know what? That person did not outplay me because they had a better gauntlet. They didn't outplay me because they had a better order. They just used their rune really well, and I was not prepared for it. Right? Like I think that I absolutely agree with you. I think that is a big consideration for the game. I also just think readability is nice in this game. I commented the game's UI. Um, but one of the things that's just so nice is the readability of seeing its belt and its epic. That's better than my blue belt. Immediately equipped, right? Like completely painless. Apex also has this, which is obviously pretty nice. But I just feel like not every BR is so like instantly comprehensible in the same way.
Yeah, and on top of that too, this is something that for the cast Monik pointed out is like you see an opponent with a wind and a fire gauntlet, you know what you're going up against, right? Like, and it's
Hmm.
very easy to distinguish, right? You don't have to worry about like, oh, is that the right thing? Like, maybe it will, do they have the attachments on the gun or whatever, right? Is especially in
Yeah.
the Warzone context, it's like, well, what the fuck are they even doing, right? Like, you're not gonna tell what they're wielding from, right? But anyway, um, do we want to move on to our week's done?
Yeah. Sure. Tell me all about it. What have you been up to
So the big
besides
thing
playing Spellbreak, I guess?
the big thing that I played this weekend was the Guilty Gear Strive Beta 2,
Oh
which
my
was
god, tell me all about it.
kind of fun. They nerfed Potemkin because they're cowards, but but he was very powerful, so it's probably not the end of the world. But it's so much fun. It's like just kind of like it's so this is funny. Um, totally unrelated and stupid reasons. I went and listened to our old Pokemon Go podcast, which was like back in year one.
Wow,
Um,
okay.
funnily enough,
Brave.
uh, funnily enough, this was right after I had gone to Evo. Then I was like, I'm down to like train for next year, and I haven't been back to Evo since because it's been the same weekend as Gen Con for like the
Right.
past 5 years, except for last year because of the disease in the air. Um, but uh, but at that Evo, I watched Exerd played for the first that was the first time I really put a lot of attention or paid any attention to it, because the finals were super hype. Um, and I had bought that game. In fact, if I was listening to the guys, like I was at the finals in Mandalay Bay, watched it, and like ordered it on my phone right there because I thought it was so cool. Games I never ended up playing a ton of that. I think that was Exerd, just because it's a very complicated game, and they've made Strive much more beginner friendly, um, which I think is good in some ways. I know it's annoyed some of the people in the community, but like I think it's accessible enough to just kind of like be grokkable. Um, and I've been playing a lot of Potemkin, uh, and it's like I feel like it's complicated enough. There's obviously a lot of depth there, but it's also simple enough that I feel like I'm not lost when things are happening. I think the good sweet spot. This is traditionally the role that like Street Fighter plays in kind of like the fighting game milieu is like Street Fighter is kind of very approachable game that like has um a lot of depth and mechanics to it, but like also like is a little bit slower. It's not like a hyper fighter where things are happening 1,000 times a second. Guilty Gear is still very much an anime game, but it's not so. But like, it's not so incomprehensible as to be like unapproachable. Which,
Yeah, it reminds because Guilty Gear, these are all Arc Systems games, right? So these
yes,
are the BlazBlue guys. I
yep,
remember BlazBlue was a big deal in college. Um, and they also did DBZ, the like Dragon Ball Fighter Z, right?
I think so. I think DBZ's Arc System. Uh,
I'm just watching. I just like brought up I actually wanted to see Potemkin because I saw a lot
his
of
Arc
memes
System.
about Potemkin because apparently he was busted on
In Beta
release or
1, he was
something like.
very, very strong.
Okay. Um and just so I can kind of like put a face to the name in a way. Um
Yeah. Also,
and I definitely see what you mean.
Guilty Gear lore is also like insane, like batshit insane. It's fun. It's fun to watch. I'll link
Yeah,
to.
Potemkin seems to be a fucking mecha, I guess.
No, so he's a dude. So he's a dude in a suit. He
Okay.
was so back in like the early. I guess it's like aughts or like it's in the 20s around our time, right? Um, Magic enters the world and like there's like and something happens with tech and like everybody abandons tech except for Zon. I think it's Zon. No, Zon's the League of Legends people. It's something with the Z. Um, and they like continue to use illegal technology. And they have a floating city. And but then there's like the oligarchs own everything. There's a bunch of slaves, and he's a Potemkin was a slave, but they had a revolution in one of the early games, and so he's like the guard to the leader of this flying city, and he's like the primary agent. Um,
Okay.
yeah, but he's a dude in a metal suit, but he's a grappler, which is and it's also like I think that city's like vaguely like an Indian XP. It's the story. It doesn't make a lot of sense, or it does. It's just complicated. Um,
Well, fair enough.
the main villain is called That Man.
Straight to the point, I
Yeah.
guess, you know.
The main character is Soul Bad Guy, which
uh,
yeah.
so is that it? Just Strive beta?
Did I do anything else? Drive Beta was the vast majority of it. Oh, one thing else I also want to give a shout out to is I've talked about this before. There's this YouTuber I follow called 8-Bit Brody. 8-Bit Brody's whole shtick is that he goes to conventions and like is vaguely obnoxious. Um, Lou's talking about I know is another Guilty Gear character. She's a witch. She's like a rock witch. Very cool character. She is the she comes from the backyard. The backyard is like an alternate space. It's like an alternate universe that got sealed in the book. And I know is like the collective will of humanity to have a better future made real, but she's also not happy about it. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
Man, people make fun of WoW lore sometimes.
Oh yeah. No.
uh, this is pretty great.
So
Oh.
so gears are like weird technological techno magical like golems. Um,
And they feel guilt.
No,
Okay.
no, no. I think so. The secret, like the big secret for the series, is that Soul is a gear, right? Like he's the guilty gear, because he's also like a
Okay.
human rather than being solely. And then like so in the beginning there was that guy, that man, Frederick, and his girlfriend Arya, and Soul Bad Guy is Frederick, and Arya is like becomes like the overgear, except it's very complicated. I know is related to all of this somehow. Very very complicated. Very silly.
Well, that's very fun. Speaking of complicated lore, I've been playing the Mass Effect. Oh, I'm sorry. I interrupted you.
Yeah,
You're talking about your YouTube guy,
yeah.
8-Bit Brody.
Yeah. So speaking of complicated lore, also, um,
Yeah.
so no, this is so his whole thing was he went to conventions and was very obnoxious, like war, like he was the used car salesman of gaming was his tagline. He can't go to conventions during a pandemic, obviously. So
That's true.
at the very beginning of the pandemic, he was like, he was like at the Antilympics, and like he did that for like 2 weeks, and it's like, in the real world, it's kind of like, well, this is gonna last for a while. So he's like, so he basically like had for like 9 months people do guest videos for while he was doing the Antilympics. There, and then like somewhere I think in November, he comes back they start doing like these scripted story bits, and it's like the dude behind the camera, or I don't know if he's actually Chase. I don't know if he's actually always been behind the camera or if it's just kind of like a fiction for this. But it's basically it's gone like all art house. Like, you know, Chase ends up shooting like um Brody hands Chase a gun and is like, oh, for the skate you're going to have to point the gun at me and pull the trigger. And Brody has loaded the gun and is like, they shoot at him, and he's been in the hospital for like the past like 15 episodes, and like Chase has been like going on like a spirit journey and trying to figure out how to continue the channel. And it involves like a woman who makes puppets, and like they go on like an acid trip. It is very strange and very entertaining, and the channel has like 12K viewers, so it's not getting a ton of attention, but it is amazing. So I will link to.
You know, on that note,
his...
so I've talked in the past about Patrick H. Williams. In the Derpies, I gave him my like YouTuber of the Year award, right? And that was specifically for the talk show era. But Patrick has he has like a seasons to his show, and his show is about himself and his friends making YouTube videos, right? And like a lot of the time there are these narrative bits that are at the front and at the end of the video. Like Patrick will be doing something and then he'll say like, this makes me think of whatever, Star Wars, and then he'll go into the video essay for 30 minutes talking about whatever the Star Wars thing is, and then he'll be like, yeah, so those are my thoughts about Star Wars, and then they'll do like a little bit of plot or whatever. Since the beginning of 2019, we've been in season 2 of the Patrick H. Willems show. Season 2 began with Patrick coming back from a vacation to like the Bahamas or like Bermuda or something, and he had a pet coconut who was his friend Charles, right? And for the last 2 years, there's just been like all of this lore in the show, in like the background of the show, about Patrick and Charles and Matt and Jake and like all these different people like coming in. And obviously there was like the talk show era and like all this stuff. It is finally coming to an end. The season finale of season 2 of Patrick H. Willems is next month, in a couple of weeks. And it is just narrative. It is a 30-minute short film about wrapping up like the Charles storyline. And I honestly almost want to do a podcast on the whole thing because it is insane. I cannot believe he pulled it off. There was in the episode before the most recent episode, there was a gigantic plot twist that had the entire Patrick H. Willems fandom, I guess. Like everyone was like, holy shit. And I remember because I was in the YouTube chat during the premiere. He set like a premiere for it or whatever, and the thing happened, like the plot twist happened, and the chat just went like fucking insane. And I think I'm maybe one of like a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 people. For a long time in Patrick's videos, the top comment on all of his videos was, if you just want to get to the good stuff, skip to this, and it would add a time code for like skipping. And eventually he just added it to the video where he says like, for the, if you want to hear about Star Wars, skip to 433 or whatever the number is. But for those of us who have stuck around for the narrative bits, it's been a wild fucking ride, and I'm excited to see its conclusion. I don't know what else to say besides that,
Buddy,
but I can't believe it's happening.
Buddy, I love you, but I'm not going to watch 2 years worth of video YouTube essays.
Honestly, I think some of them are very good, and I've wanted to, because we did the one on plot holes, and I've wanted to do episodes on some of the other stuff that he's covered, because I think there's actually just some like really interesting shit in there that I'll sometimes talk about. Like for instance, his most recent episode is the trouble with trilogies, which sort of talks about how a lot of our big film franchises are these trilogies that end with a disappointing final installment, right? Like the Matrix Revolutions, the Rise of Skywalker, is a good example. Even stuff like the Dark Knight Rises, right? Like
yeah, even Return of the Jedi isn't as good as Empire, right? Like
yeah, he spends a long time actually talking about Return of the Jedi, mostly because like there's a lot of scholarship on that, right? Like people have talked about Return of the Jedi, or like the making of Return of the Jedi in a way that you can kind of peel back the curtain. Like one of the things that George Lucas originally had for Return of the Jedi is that Han and or I'm sorry, not Han, because Han's in Carbonite. Luke and Leia at the beginning of the movie have a conflict because they have to decide whether or not they want to follow through with the rebellion, doing rebellion stuff, and or save Han, right? And which they eventually, obviously would theoretically choose save Han. That stuff got cut out in the script phase. Like it's not like there's like this is like Snyder cut kind of territory or anything
Right.
like that. But it's just like decisions like that get made, and they do make the movie sort of worse because like one of the things that sucks about that movie is that Han and Leia don't really have anything going on. Their stuff has basically been resolved in Empire, and they're just kind of hanging around, right? Like this is what the Red Letter Media guys talk about, right? Like Han and Leia in Return of the Jedi are basically just a B plot that goes nowhere. The interesting stuff is all happening with Luke and Vader, and then you cut back to Han and Leia, and there's just nothing interesting going on a character level, which I do think is true, to be honest. And I just think that is, I don't know, I just think that that's interesting. He's had a couple of other videos like that. Like one of them is what's the point of R-rated superheroes, where he just kind of talks about like, why are we trying to, what is with the current fascination of making like these super edgy, like The Boys would be a good example, Invincible would be another good example, of like very like brutal bleak versions of superheroes, and like superhero stuff or whatever. So I definitely would recommend the Patrick H. Willems oeuvre. But yeah, it is a little bit nuts that this has been going on for 2 fucking years.
Yeah. And to be clear, it's not that I particularly object to what it's like. If you wanted to do a show on this for the finale, I'm not watching 2 years worth of analysis videos in like a
Sure.
week or two.
Plus, we're also like really backed up on stuff that we're supposed to watch.
Yeah.
Like we've said we were gonna do a Young Justice episode and a My Hero Academia episode, both of which have not a Mandalorian episode.
Yeah.
Like none of these have materialized.
Yeah. I mean, we just just keep finding games to play. It took us
Yeah.
4 weeks to do an Outriders episode.
Oh my god, right?
Um, continuous
And then
delays.
other than that, I have been playing the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, which I have not been playing as much of as I was expecting to. I'm only like 12 hours in, which sounds bad because I guess it came out on Friday, so maybe that is a lot of time. But I was expecting to like be done with Mass Effect by the end of the weekend. But I ended up playing a bunch of WoW because people pinged me, and I was just like, I fucking love running mythics. Um, I am immensely surprised at how well Mass Effect 1, specifically the opening kind of chapter, really holds up. I think a lot of Mass Effect side content is not great or compelling, and you can really sort of feel its age when it comes to that stuff. At the time, I remember this being magical, right? Like the idea that I had this starship and I could go to any system in the galaxy and land on these planets and like explore them, and there was stuff to explore. And I just spent so much time doing that stuff. But now you can really like feel, because we've had better open world games in the intervening 15 years, how kind of bare bones a lot of that stuff is. But I'm still determined to do it from some sort of weird odd completionist thing. I have been very painstakingly mapping out what are the systems that I have explored for like stuff, and what are the systems that I have not explored yet in terms of like what planets have I landed on, and I've done their like little like little story content or whatever. Um, but honestly, I think I might just get to a point where I end up mainlining the rest of the core narrative stuff, because that stuff is all still really good. Um, I think Mass Effect has maybe one of the best opening hours of a modern video game that I can think of, though. Like the very first Mass Effect has just like a really enticing, really compelling hook. Everything from Eden Prime kind of up through the first kind of interaction on the Citadel, you get all these different squad mates over the course of that. But I just really love, like, one of my favorite things in the game is it reminds me of sort of these Blizzard plot twists that I talk about, right? Like where Illidan kills where Illidan kills Zira, the Prime Naru, at the end of Legion, or Anduin is a good example of this, right? Like the current stuff that's going on with Anduin and Shadowlands, right? Like these really interesting plot twists where you think it's going to go one way and then it goes, really hard the other direction. The opening of the game includes this Turian Spectre Nihilus, and he's like, I'm going to watch your back for the first couple of missions because I want to get a sense for your abilities. And then he fucking dies immediately. And it's just like, that's really compelling drama. Like, you think this is a game where you're going to have, like, a mentor figure and you're going to grow. It's like, nope, that guy's dead. This is a stakes raising moment, and it's fucking sweet. I also realize how much I enjoy real voice actors. Um, this is a weird thing for me to kind of complain about, I guess. But something I was thinking about the other day was how much having kind of celebrity voice actors sort of sucks in games because they are not good at them. Whereas I'm very immersed. Maybe it's just a matter of writing. I'm very immersed in the Mass Effect world, and I think part of that is that a lot of the voice actors that I'm interacting with on a moment to moment basis aren't like, I don't know, hamming it up. Maybe is what I'm sort of like describing here. I'm actually kind of shitting on, by the way, future BioWare games because I think the future BioWare games is where they pull in like, Freddie Prinze Jr. whoever to like voice act stuff. But it's just, I don't know. There's something good about all of the voice acting so far. Though I am really itching, obviously, to get to Mass Effect 2 because I have not played that game in a long time, and I'm excited to get all of the fucking achievements again, even though I've already done that once over already. So yeah.
It's another trilogy with a questionable third entry.
I would argue that it is not, but fair enough.
Well, I mean, even you think that Mass Effect 3 is better than Mass Effect 2?
No, but I think that it is very good. Like, I think that Mass Effect 3 is a very good video game.
Sure. I mean, I think Return of the Jedi is a great movie. Even though I don't think it's as good as Empire, right? So
what's a good? Well, yeah, but I think it's better than Return of the Jedi. Trying to think of what's like a trilogy that ends really well, but like not amazing. Kung Fu Panda is a good example of this. Kung Fu Panda 3 is a very good film, but Kung Fu Panda 2 is better, right? I would say that Mass Effect is pretty similar, right? I have gripes. I don't think the ending is great, but I also think that people are insane about the Mass Effect ending. People are also insane about certain other story decisions in there that I think they are very wrong about. In sort of the same way that like I described this about Battle for Azeroth, right? When we were talking about that expansion in a podcast last year, the people's opinion trickles down in a way, right? Because they create this idea that Battle for Azeroth is a bad expansion, everything inside of that expansion then becomes subsequently bad. And I think that that's also true of the Mass Effect 3. I don't think the Mass Effect 3's ending is very good. The final 15 minutes are very good. But I think the whole rest of the game is spectacular. And to be honest, is much better than Mass Effect 2 in a lot of places in a lot of ways. And so yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I also think that part of that is like, I think a lot of people feel, and I sometimes felt that like if you don't stick the landing, you might as well throw the rest of it out, right? Like I think Return of the Jedi sticks the landing, right? Like I don't think it's perfect,
Sure.
but like I can forgive that like the B plot of Return of the Jedi is kind of weak because I think the moment between Luke and Anakin,
is that good? Yeah.
Conversely, and I never played through Mass Effect all the way, but I can understand when people say that, the fact that the ending kind of like my understanding is that paves over kind of like the whole whole like your choices matter type thing, especially in the initial release. I think part of this too is that like, with the the ability, like because the Legendary Edition comes with all the DLC, right? Like I think the full product's always going to be better, right? Like
so okay, yeah, but here's my thing about that. I do understand that, Chris, and this is what I think is wrong. The whole game is about your choices mattering, right? And you are playing through plenty of spots where it is taking into account the different choices that you have made and are paying those off. So I don't think the ending needs to pay those things off because they have been paid off in X 1, 2, and 3. You know what I mean? In the previous, and so that is my very specific gripe. Like, yes, I think in the very final seconds of the game, it is dumb that the final thing that Shepard does is like kill a random enemy with a pistol and then go do this, this whatever thing in the sky with like fucking dialogue, whatever that ending kind of like ends up being. But I don't think that choices fail to matter, because we have spent the entire time paying off all of the, you're going to the Krogan homeworld and following up on all the Krogan plot threads. You're going to, the Quarian homeworld and following up on all of this Quarian Geth plot threads. Those choices are paid off in the game, and I just feel like that stuff is ignored because, like, I don't know, I guess it's not in, like, I feel like what people wanted was the ending of Fallout 3, where it goes through in the end sequence of the game and says, well, after the Wanderer did this, these guys did that. And I don't think that that is a good example of choices mattering. I want that stuff to be gameplay in the meat of the story. I don't want it to pay off at the, I don't want the payoff to be a cutscene at the end. I want the payoff to be moments that I'm playing in the game. So that's my thing about Mass Effect 3, and its its ending or whatever. Anyway.
I would say why not both, because I think you're right in a lot of ways, but like,
Yeah.
and I'm like you said, I'm not super qualified to talk on Mass Effect since I never finished it. Maybe I'll do that at some point. We can talk about it. But
I definitely also think Mass Effect 3 gets better. So I do agree with your point that Mass Effect 3 gets better with the DLC. I mean, a lot of people would say that the real ending of that game is what's called the Citadel DLC, which is a DLC side story, but it is the story that pays off specifically like all of your companions, right? Like it is the DLC where you are hanging out with and you have a big party with everybody. And I actually think that that works well as a piece of side content, because it doesn't make sense in like a, like in an end of the world scenario to sort of end with that party. But as the final piece of DLC for the game, it is very satisfying. And that, was not in release. So I definitely would get, people not really connecting with the initial release of the game, because there was stuff that's kind of hidden away with DLC.
Fair enough. You have anything else you want to talk about before we punch out?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, if you'd like to email us about any things we talked about on this podcast, you can email us at subjectplaygames@gmail.com. Podcast, excuse me, at subjectplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/subjectplaygames, where these go live. You can also follow us on YouTube, where I managed to get the episode up early this week. So,
Hell yeah.
It's I'm making progress. Like and subscribe us there. I guess that's the thing I'm supposed to do. All the things. Rate us wherever. Be good to us. Give us your love, please. We crave it desperately. But that's everything I have. But you have anything you're looking to promote?
I have. Oh, you know what? We're doing another movie night this week. We're watching Space Jam, which I'm mad about. I put Space Jam up because somebody was like, "Hey, do you guys want to watch Space Jam?" Because I put these up for polls or whatever. I don't even know who recommended it, but as soon as I put Space Jam up, I was like, "There's no fucking way that Space Jam is losing the vote." And sure enough, it was Space Jam, Teen Titans Go to the Movies, and Drunken Master, which is the Jackie Chan movie from the 70s. And Space Jam got 11 votes to the other ones 2. It's like, yeah, people really love the basketball movie, I guess.
Not only that, but like, it's kind of like, what's the expression? Vanilla isn't the most popular ice cream flavor in America because it's anybody's favorite. It's because Teen Titans Go to the Movie, we both loved, but it's also kind of more niche than like Drunken Master. I think I've seen that. If I remember the one, it's fun, but like, that's like, might as well put up like what's like a
Casablanca.
Yeah. For all random people on the internet, I care, but yeah, makes sense. But anyway, with that, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.